Let me share a kind of heartbreaking tale from my life. I wish no one else has to go through this. But if you do, maybe my experience can guide you. My wife got an invite to this big corporate shindig. It was super fancy, like you had to dress up in ballroom gear. A couple of weeks before the event, she started getting all worked up about everything. She even asked me if I was sure I wanted to go. She said it was cool if I just wanted to chill at home. Usually, she's the one dragging me out, and if I wanted to stay in, she'd hand me a to-do list. So, her suggesting I kick back was kind of strange. I reassured her that I was going, and she didn't need to stress about it. As the event date got closer, I noticed she was on her phone a lot more than usual. She didn't say why, and I didn't feel like I could ask. One time, we were in the car, her phone hooked up to the Bluetooth, and she totally freaked. She started hitting the power button like crazy when the Bluetooth wouldn't disconnect. Her face went all red, and she just stared out the window. It was really concerning. What was she so scared of me seeing? She went into a store, leaving her phone on the seat. She couldn't have been that worried, right? So, I decided to snoop a bit. I didn't find anything juicy in her texts, so I checked her email. There was an open email saying she had some test results waiting on her doctor's website. I checked it out, and it was a positive test for an STD that can't be cured. I was floored, trying to wrap my head around what I just discovered. I wondered if she was ever going to break the news to me. We hadn't been intimate for 3 months, the longest dry spell we'd ever had. The test results were only 4 days old. Was I infected too? My mind was spinning when my wife came sprinting back to the car with the groceries. I figured I had time to check one more thing. I searched her apps for WhatsApp and bingo, there it was. I opened it and found a bunch of messages to a guy named Michael. The only Michael in her life that I knew of was her boss. I locked her phone and put it back on her seat. She hopped in the car, relieved to see her phone. She said she wasn't sure if she'd lost it and gave me this long look, trying to figure out if I'd snooped. I kept my cool and drove us home. We got to the ball before I had another chance to check her phone. I didn't sleep with her, and I didn't ask her anything. I wanted to know when she was going to drop this bombshell on me. I was already entertaining the idea that she'd been unfaithful, 'cause I didn't think I had the same thing she did. But I wouldn't know for sure until I got myself checked out. Why wouldn't she tell me about her diagnosis unless she was stepping out on me? These thoughts were racing through my mind as we walked into the ball. We had a table, and that's where my wife put down her little clutch. I thought about trying to sneak a look at her phone. Her boss came over to say hi. He kissed my wife's hand and told her he was really happy she made it. She introduced me to him in a pretty lackluster way, and he greeted me with the same lack of enthusiasm. He asked if he could have the first dance with my wife, and I felt like I couldn't say no. Plus, I wanted to check her phone while she was dancing with him. It seemed like they were whispering to each other. It was odd, and I was getting fed up. I started going through her phone, not caring if she saw me. I opened her WhatsApp and saw that Michael had confirmed exactly when we'd be arriving, and a little more scrolling revealed plans for them to sneak off as soon as I hit the restroom or went outside for a smoke. I looked up at them, stunned. They were at the bar getting drinks. I kept reading their messages, talking about their hookups and plans for more. My wife even told him about her diagnosis, and he apologized for not letting her know. She freaked out in the messages, wondering how she was supposed to tell her husband of 7 years that she suddenly had an incurable STD. He suggested that maybe she wouldn't have to tell me if she just left me for him. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to my phone. Then I used her phone to share it all on her social media. She was connected with folks all over this ballroom. I saw people checking their phones, gasping, then looking around for my wife or her boss. I even included a few messages where they were bad-mouthing their co-workers and employees. I watched as someone rushed to tell the boss there was an issue, and he left the ballroom to deal with it. My wife was left by herself, so she started heading back to our table. She looked super uneasy, like she could tell something was off and people were staring at her. I stared at her too, putting on a fake smile and folding my hands in front of me. She greeted me with suspicion. I simply said, "I'm gonna file for divorce because you're not my wife anymore." Her jaw hit the floor, and she sat next to me, asking what was happening. I handed her back her phone and told her to check what she'd posted a few minutes ago. She was totally baffled and looked at me like I was speaking a different language. When she unlocked her phone, I saw the horror wash over her face. She looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes, her hand over her mouth. She realized her boss was probably canned, which meant she'd be out of a job too. She realized everyone in the room was staring at her because they now knew for sure, not just guessing, that she'd been sleeping with the boss and they both had an STD. How low and revolting. She started sobbing uncontrollably, grabbed her things, and bolted from the hotel towards my car. I followed her at a leisurely pace, nodding to everyone who gave me a look. I had the keys in my pocket, and I wasn't about to give her a lift back to our place. When I got to the car, she was standing there, arms crossed. I asked her what she thought she was doing. She said she wanted to get in the car and go home. I asked her if she meant her folks' place or her boss's place. She looked at me, shocked and upset. She begged me not to do this and said I couldn't be serious. I told her I'd show her just how serious I was, that she was never setting foot in my house or my car again. I unlocked my door, hopped in, and locked it again. She was yelling at me to let her in, but it quickly turned into desperate sobbing. A crowd had gathered outside the hotel, watching our drama unfold by the car. Everyone knew she was the one who'd been fooling around with the boss. She was the one with the STD. She finally gave up trying to get in the car with me and chose to bolt into the woods next to the parking lot. I drove home. I didn't give a hoot about what happened to her anymore. I set up a doctor's appointment for the next day. 3 days later, I got my test results back, and thank goodness I was clean. I also heard that my ex's boss got the boot as soon as her boss had a chance to slip away from the intense scrutiny he was under. He packed up and hit the road. On his way out, he swung by to pick up my ex. They hadn't been back in town since. I dumped all my ex's stuff outside between 2 tarps. That was more thoughtfulness than she ever showed me. But she never came back for it. My dog was my biggest comfort during the breakup. I also heard that my ex got dumped by Michael after 5 months. Man, what a swanky setting to uncover the nasty secrets your wife was hiding from you. It was a stroke of luck that she left her phone behind so you could blow the lid off their cheating and disgraceful behavior to everyone they knew. It's a good thing you didn't sleep with her before finding out the truth, and you dodged a bullet by not getting roped into raising a kid from an affair. She acted like a gold digger, probably choosing to sleep with her boss because he was loaded. A woman who does this can't be trusted. She doesn't have the right priorities in life and probably never will unless life knocks her down a peg or two. My girlfriend, who's 22, used to babysit for this really nice family we both knew from church. They were pretty well off, so hanging out at their place wasn't a drag at all. To top it off, their little kids were super well behaved and went to bed without a fuss. She invited me over a few times while she was babysitting, and the kids were asleep. We never messed around or anything, even though it felt like we could have easily done so. This family had an older son named Sean. He was 18, but they usually didn't have him babysit because he was always busy with something or at hockey practice. One time while she was babysitting, my girlfriend suddenly stopped replying to my texts. I thought something serious might have happened. She'd already told me the kids were asleep, but I thought maybe one of them had woken up. After waiting an hour without hearing from her, I decided to drive over there to see what was up. At first glance, everything seemed fine. No flashing cop lights or anything alarming like that. As I walked up to the front door, I noticed some strange movement through the window. I pressed my hands against my face to get a better look into the living room through a small crack in the blinds. I was stunned to see John in bed with my girlfriend. I spun around and tried to open the front door, but it was locked. Suddenly, a car pulled into the driveway at breakneck speed. It barely came to a halt before the door flew open and John's dad got out. I instinctively raised my hands and said, "I just arrived." John's dad didn't even notice me. He just rushed to the front door and unlocked it quickly. He stormed in, with John's mom right on his heels, demanding to know what on earth they thought they were doing. My girlfriend let out a scream and John started yelling. His dad told him to get out of the house. He wasn't allowed to have unprotected sex before marriage in their home, especially with his younger siblings sleeping upstairs. He asked them how awful it would have been if the siblings had come downstairs and caught them in the act. He turned to my girlfriend, who'd only managed to get her underwear back on, and told her she was supposed to be the responsible one here, and she'd screwed up big time. That's when my girlfriend noticed I was standing in the doorway. She started crying uncontrollably and quickly got dressed. She apologized profusely to John's dad, mom, and me before she jumped in her car and drove off. I realized I didn't belong there anymore now that my cheating girlfriend had left. Just as I was about to leave, John's mom followed me outside, closing the front door behind her to drown out the shouting match between John and his dad. She apologized to me for what I was going through. She reminded me that just because one relationship ends, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. I thanked her and asked how they knew what was going on at the house. She said they had a hidden camera in the living room that was linked to their phones. They'd seen me every time I was at their house, but since they knew I was a stand-up guy, they didn't mind me hanging out with my girlfriend. They actually felt their kids were safer when I was there too. I spilled the beans to my parents about everything that had happened. I was living on my own at that point, but I needed their support. They told me I didn't have to ever talk to my girlfriend again. She'd shown herself to be unfit to be a wife. Just then, she called me. She told me she'd never mess up like this again. I believed her, but that didn't mean I wanted her back. I asked her why she did it and what happened. She just told me that after John got home, they started chatting, and after a bit, he straight up asked if she wanted to have sex. She didn't really think it through and just gave in. That stung to hear. How could she just not think about it? She gave in to her basic urges with barely any resistance, thinking she wouldn't get caught. It was so unfair to me, her devoted boyfriend. I was faithful to her, even when a woman at my work made a pass at me. Well, that phone call was all I needed to make up my mind. I wasn't going to stick with her anymore. I told her right then and there on the same call. Okay, it was nice knowing you, but our time together is over. I wish you all the best. And I hung up. It wasn't long before she tried to call me back several times, but I never picked up. John's parents had spilled the beans to my ex's parents and the church that they'd caught her in the act in their house while she was supposed to be babysitting. I didn't keep tabs on my ex after that, but I heard she moved out of town. Buddy, I'm really sorry you had to go through all that worry and panic and find your girlfriend cheating. It's a shame she didn't show more respect to that family, you, and even herself. It doesn't seem like she's mature enough for a serious relationship or a job. You made the right call to seek support and break up with her. A good partner would never do anything to risk their relationship, even if they think no one's watching. I wish you all the best moving forward. My wife, who was 27, had a big issue with comparing herself to her younger, more attractive sister, Madison. Madison stayed single and never stopped chasing her dream job. She was pretty successful and even had a following on TikTok, which really got under my wife's skin. But she never confessed to feeling this way about her sister. Sometimes she'd vent to me about it, but she'd always backtrack later by expressing love for Madison. My wife even went as far as to ask me, both while we were dating and after we got married, if I wished I'd met her sister instead. I always reassured her, saying absolutely not, that I believed we were meant to be together, and she deserved to be happy in her own life, regardless of what her sister was up to. Well, my wife just didn't seem to get what I was trying to tell her. She kept obsessing over her sister and comparing her life to others. But when she was on the phone with her sister, she was all supportive and never showed any signs of envy. Things really hit the fan when Madison got engaged. We agreed to meet them for dinner, and naturally, her fiancé was a successful guy who had his act together. They were a good match, and I was genuinely happy for them. But my wife, not so much. She put on a good show, but as soon as we got in the car, she started acting strange. She was quiet and kept checking her phone. I was pretty sure she was snooping on Madison's fiancé's social media. After a few days, she started acting a bit more friendly towards me again, and over the next 3 weeks, she met up with her sister a few times without me. The first time, while I was at work, she didn't tell me about it. I was working late, but I found out she left the house because our security alarm kept a record of when we come and go. After she went out 2 more times, I asked her what was up. She said she was meeting with Madison because Madison was starting to have doubts about trusting her fiancé. This didn't add up to me because they seemed pretty happy and solid when I met them. I started checking out Madison's Facebook while my wife was supposedly hanging out with her. Madison seemed all good with her guy and was even posting cheerful updates about wedding planning. I finally messaged Madison asking if she was with my wife at that moment. She said no and asked why. My heart dropped, and I explained that my wife had told me she'd been hanging out with Madison a few times that week. I could tell Madison started to get worried because she mentioned her fiancé had been hitting the gym a lot more lately. She said she was going to try to call him to see if he'd pick up, but he didn't. We couldn't track either of their locations either. Madison went to the gym, but her guy wasn't there. So, with no other options, we just waited for them to come home. Madison texted me that her fiancé got home at the exact same time my wife pulled into our driveway. When she walked in, I lost it. I tried to keep my cool, but my voice started to shake. So I started shouting. I told her I knew she wasn't with Madison, and Madison's fiancé was MIA too. She actually had the audacity to accuse me of having a thing for her sister since I admitted to messaging her. Before I could say anything, she said that I could have her sister now because she wanted a divorce. I was totally floored by what she was saying. I told her I didn't have feelings for Madison. Madison just helped me figure out that she was lying to me. I demanded to know where she'd been and why she suddenly wanted a divorce. She said Madison's fiancé, AP, was in love with her. He'd realized how much better she was compared to her younger sister, who was scared of commitment. I stared her down and told her she was insane and heartless for stealing her sister's guy when they seemed so happy. I insulted her, so she slapped me and stormed out the door with bags she'd packed beforehand. She was acting so absurd, like she thought AP and her were soulmates, and by leaving me as quickly as possible, she'd be with him forever. I called Madison and she picked up, even though she was in the middle of yelling at AP. I heard him sobbing and apologizing to her. She brushed him off and went into another room to tell me what he'd told her, that my wife had persuaded him to meet with her a few times so she could get to know the man her sister was going to marry. She told him she wanted to keep it a secret from Madison and me because we would blow it out of proportion. Then she convinced him to sleep with her as some sort of twisted way to prove he was worthy of Madison's love. I was stunned by what I was hearing. It was so twisted. All I could do was apologize to her on behalf of her sister because she'd wrecked her plans to marry the man she loved. AP was immediately remorseful and pleaded for Madison's forgiveness. She was sobbing on the phone with me, and I asked her what we should do. Without missing a beat, she said she was breaking up with him. I told her I'd divorce my wife because neither of them deserved us. We made a kind of pact to get through this and come out stronger. A year later, Madison and I are spending a lot of time together. Our relationship is slowly turning into something more romantic. AP moved away as soon as he realized he wasn't going to get her forgiveness. He didn't even think about moving in with my wife because she was just a mistake to him. When my ex realized that's how he saw her and he was gone, she started calling me every day, multiple times a day, to beg me for a sleepover or a coffee date and a chat. I said no every time and only picked up the phone if she wouldn't stop calling. She started camping out in the yard, so I got a restraining order after the divorce was finalized. She was camping in the yard when her sister came over to hang out with me, and she completely lost it. I was ready to call the cops if she tried to enter the house, but luckily, she wasn't that bold since she had to leave due to the restraining order and trespassing charges. I didn't hear from her after that. The last update I got was that her dad had to get her out of jail for some dumb thing. Dude, your wife definitely had some weird fixation with her sister's life. It ended up wrecking her and only confirmed her biggest fear, that her sister was a better person than her. Comparisons can really drain the joy out of someone's life. It was your wife's job to be a grown-up woman who understood what mattered in a marriage: open communication, honesty, and selflessness. She didn't know how to be a genuinely supportive sister either. She'll never have a meaningful relationship with anyone if she doesn't learn to be selfless and honorable. Stay thankful and satisfied with what you have in life. You did the right thing by not giving your wife another chance after she acted like this. You're a role model for others going through this kind of betrayal. My wife, who was 32 at the time of this story, had a best friend from college. They used to party like there was no tomorrow, so much so that it's a miracle my wife didn't fail out of college. I, being 35, met my wife on her first day at work. I'd been working there a few years before she was hired, so I was tasked with showing her the ropes. Eventually, we tied the knot, which brings us to the start of the story. After we'd been married for 6 years, her wild college friend finally decided to get hitched. My wife was surprised her friend was even ready to settle down, and thought maybe she was invited because her friend wanted to squeeze in more single lady time or something. Early on in our marriage, we agreed that my wife wouldn't stay close to this girl for the sake of our relationship. One night, shortly after she found out her friend was engaged, she told me she was going to spend the evening with her parents and wouldn't be back until after dinner. This wasn't out of the ordinary, so I said that was fine. When I got home from work, I went to take out the trash and noticed something that looked like a postcard through the side of the bag. Curiosity got the best of me, so I read it through the plastic. It was an invite to a bachelorette party happening that very night. It was taking place in the city at a male S-club. I headed there without a second thought. I didn't want my wife ogling other men or getting influenced to revert back to her party girl ways. When I got there, I started asking around for my wife or the bride-to-be by name. Eventually, I found a woman who said they'd left the party a little while ago with 2 guys. When I asked where they'd gone, she was hesitant to tell me. I pleaded and even offered her money, so she gave me the name of a hotel. I couldn't believe this was happening. I kept dialing my wife's number over and over until I got to the hotel lobby. She wouldn't pick up. I asked the receptionist for their room number, but she wouldn't give it to me. I waited for a bit until I saw her coming off the elevator with a guy. He looked pretty satisfied, and so did my wife, until she looked up and saw me standing in their way. She gasped, covered her mouth, and tears started streaming down her face when the guy was told I was her husband. He looked away, down, and grimaced. It wasn't his problem, but he didn't like being caught in the middle. I asked what had just happened, and my wife just looked frozen. She managed to say that she'd made a bad choice to party that night and asked if we could go home to talk about it. I asked her again what they'd done, but she just stared at me. She opened her mouth but couldn't get the words out. She grabbed my hand and tried to leave the lobby. I pulled away and said I wasn't taking her back home if she'd just cheated on me. She was at a loss for what to do, so she just sat down on the lobby floor and started crying. Her friend came down and was shocked to see what was happening. It turned out my wife had lied and told her friend we'd been separated for months. Eventually, we ended up sitting in my car, but before I drove anywhere, she confessed that she couldn't help herself. She just couldn't resist having a bit of fun with her friend, fun that I wouldn't approve of because it wasn't right or in line with the vows we'd made to each other. So she lied and did it anyway. She said after being married for a while, she was craving some excitement. At that point, I'd heard enough. I summed it up for her that she was bored and unsatisfied with our relationship, so she cheated on me. Then I told her I was done and wouldn't forgive her for this. I didn't want to be married to her anymore, so she started sobbing uncontrollably. She got out of the car after I asked her a few times and I drove off. Her brother ended up letting her stay with him and came to my house to pick up her stuff. A week later, after a month, he was fed up with her living with him. She was in a bad place and couldn't bring herself to go to work or see a future. She kept calling me, asking what I was up to and begging to come over. I said no every time. I didn't want to be around her or get talked into letting her back into my life. Women can be cunning when they want to be, and after she showed her true colors, I couldn't take any risks. I kept saying no until I just stopped picking up her calls. I don't plan on ever being taken for a ride again, but if this experience taught me anything, it's that I can't control what my partner does. I can only trust and protect myself if needed. Even though I loved her for many years, I knew I could feel the same way about another woman someday. It's been 2 years and my ex is still living at her brother's place. Now they can't stand each other, and she's bitter that I never forgave her for one night of fun. Despite thinking she deserved this night of fun, now she's on social media preaching about how bad partying and drinking are. Buddy, I'm sorry your wife lied to you and decided to cheat on you at her friend's bachelorette party. She made it clear that what she wanted, no matter how wrong it was, mattered more than you. She only felt guilty when she got caught, but that's only because she didn't plan on getting busted. She turned bitter because she never thought her actions would lead to unwanted consequences. She made it seem like the years you two spent together were like pausing her life, and nobody should ever feel that way. What she did was totally unfair and unforgivable. I'm really glad you stumbled upon that invitation, and then found her too. As crappy as that night was, at least you discovered the truth firsthand. You're smart not to let her back into your life, not even for a moment. I wish you nothing but the best moving forward. I called it quits on my affair, and my husband kicked off his own within 3 years. Life was a dream when we first fell for each other, but after tying the knot, I often felt alone, uncherished, and overlooked. My husband relocated to a different country for his job training. He was digging his new surroundings, made some cool friends, and was really living it up. I missed him like crazy and would bombard him with emails and texts, which he'd respond to now and then. From the moment I woke up, I'd be waiting for his call. When he did ring, our chats would last a measly 5-7 minutes max. He never once said, "miss you," on his own, but would echo it back when I said or texted it. Eventually, I stopped emailing and texting him. He didn't even notice, let alone ask me why. I started to believe he didn't love me. Around that time, I noticed one of my guy friends was really attentive, appreciative, and a great companion. I felt loved, desired, and even like a queen. I found myself falling for him, and we had an affair that lasted 18 months. It was a golden period. We even slept together 6 times. I wasn't really into having a sexual affair, but my affair partner was super into it. My affair partner was so smitten with me that he was ready to ditch his wife and tie the knot with me. One day, he popped the question. I was swamped with guilt and felt weighed down. I despised myself and was repulsed by my actions. I felt awful for his wife. One day, after giving him a heads up, I decided to own up to my actions. I met my affair partner's wife at her place and spilled the beans about everything, except his proposal. She was livid, lashed out at me with whatever she could grab in the room, hurled a ton of obscenities at me and my family, and literally booted me out of her house. I felt I deserved it, so I let her vent her anger on me. I was even prepared to die. My affair partner rushed to my side and proposed to me right in front of her. Seeing her break down in tears was heart-wrenching. I felt terrible and even sorrier for her. I loathed myself. My affair partner was crushed when I chose my husband over him. I ended the affair right then and there in 2012. I sent her apology emails for years, but stopped in 2016. She would unleash her anger, disgust, and hatred in every response. I still feel guilty, and I owe her a lifetime of apologies. After I met my affair partner's wife and ended the affair, my husband came home unexpectedly in 2 days. I confessed everything to my husband, ready for whatever came next, even death or divorce. He too lashed out at me, hurling every nasty word in the book at me. I couldn't say a word in response or even look him in the eye. I deserved it. I suggested he divorce me, thinking it would bring him justice and peace, but he refused to divorce me, saying he still loved me and our child needed a mother. He accepted my apology after a week, and this time we all moved together, relocated our home, and started living under the same roof. He was in a terrible state for 3 weeks and took about 5 months to heal. It was unbearable to see him suffer, all because of my selfish actions. I felt like setting myself on fire every time I thought about the pain I caused my husband and my affair partner's wife. I ruined their happiness. It's been 8 years since I ended my affair. I still carry the guilt. I still pray for the peace and happiness of my affair partner's wife. Over the past 8 years, I've often felt guilty and thanked my husband for taking me back. Miraculously, my marriage returned to normal within 6 months after my affair. My husband never brought it up, even in the worst of times. But he didn't change at all. Even though we lived under the same roof, I still felt lonely, unloved, and lacked companionship. Our relationship felt empty, but I had dedicated my heart and body to my husband and remained deserving of his love and trust. I felt grateful. We were leading a happy life until I discovered his affair recently. I never checked my husband's phone at all, but 3 months ago, my phone died, so I used his phone without asking to record a video of our little one, our second child, born in 2016, singing beautifully. My husband was watching TV in the living room. When I checked his gallery, I almost fainted. Saw a lot of videos of a lady doing BJ. There were 4 explicit videos as well. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I wished the ground would open up and swallow me whole. I felt a quake inside me. Every part of me, as a woman, was shattered. I was shaking, and I ran into the bathroom, crying my eyes out. I had ended my affair, and 3 years later, he had started one. I can't wrap my head around the fact that my husband did this to me. He was my symbol of true love. I felt like I was dead inside. He's been having an affair for the past 4.5 years, while I've been drowning in guilt and gratitude. I felt like an absolute idiot. My affair was the only thing I ever kept from him. He didn't even have the decency to confess about his affair. He thought I would end myself if he confessed. He swears he's ended it with her and will be faithful to me from now on, but I can't get past his betrayal. He promises he'll never do it again and that he'll be a good husband and father. But how can I live with this liar? Why did he forgive me after my affair in the first place? Was his forgiveness just a sham? He could have divorced me. He claims it wasn't revenge, but that he gave in to temptation, to greed and lust. I had complications during pregnancy, and we couldn't be intimate for 9 months. Could that be why? I can't believe I was such a fool. He was always watching XCX content, but I never felt like I could say anything because of my own past mistakes. How could he betray me when I was carrying his child, when I was nursing our baby? While I was still drowning in guilt after all these years, I was so grateful to him and practically worshipped him because he forgave me. Whenever I complained about feeling lonely, he always reassured me that he loved me, even if he wasn't as expressive as I was, and that he'd never leave me. He called us soulmates and said we had the perfect marriage. He always seemed happy. He kept telling me that I was the only woman in his life. So why did he do this to me? A 4.5-year affair with his coworker and 56 videos from every encounter. It was a full-blown sexual affair. He claims they didn't love each other and were just together for the sex. I constantly feel like ending it all. He's asking for another chance and feels bad for cheating, but I'm nowhere near forgiving or accepting what he did. I can't get past it. The videos keep playing over and over in my mind. I'm so sad and feel like I'm going crazy. Should I stay in this marriage, or should I leave and be on my own? What will happen to my kids if I leave? I'm a stay-at-home mom, so if I leave, I'll have to start from scratch.